My father manipulated my mom into moving us away, resenting me for my birth and beating me for survival. Just because we won't let you play video games doesn't mean your life is miserable, said my abuser uncle. My brother tormented me, and I fled abuse, but will I ever escape my past? Content warning. Addiction, alcohol, drug, domestic partner abuse, emotional abuse, child-infant abuse, homophobia, manipulation, racism, suicidal ideation. Due to Reddit's terms of service and the rules of this subreddit, what I need to express will be slightly censored to avoid violating these guidelines. Therefore, to the moderators of this subreddit, please allow this post to remain visible. I dedicated hours to ensuring it complies with all your rules. From what I have been informed, even though my brother was planned, my father never wanted children, let alone two. Before my birth, he manipulated his acquaintances into placing their belongings in my mother's apartment to have her arrested. He did this because of my accidental conception, which he would later confess was the reason for his alcoholism. He also orchestrated this to compel us to leave Michigan and relocate to East Moline, Illinois, so that my mother would not be near her family, allowing him more control over our lives, all while trying to convince her it was her fault. When I was born, I experienced some breathing difficulties, which necessitated hospitalization at a few months old and again at the age of 2. During this period, my father hoped I would die because he never wanted me and blamed me for his issues. However, since I survived, he was furious that I didn't die the second time and threw me against a wall. After I turned 3, I encountered the same breathing problems for a third time, which have not recurred since. I still deal with some respiratory problems, and reflecting on it now, I might simply have undiagnosed asthma. I don't remember much of what happened after that because I was too young, but my earliest memories emerged when I was about 4, although they remain somewhat hazy. We were living in a cheap motel where the first memories of abuse began to surface. I recall my brother spraying a cleaning solution into my eye, and instead of explaining why that was wrong or teaching him how to manage intrusive thoughts, my father merely began physically assaulting him. We were about 4 or 5 at the time, so I never held it against my brother. However, I also recall my father being arrested for the first time during this period, which was a frequent occurrence. While living there, we had a box television in our room, allowing my brother and me to watch cartoons before school, as those were one of the only 2 joys I experienced in life, the other being video games, which I will discuss extensively throughout this biography, as they played a significant role in my life. In 2006, we lived with 2 close family friends. They were the only individuals my mother remained friends with because my father couldn't turn them against her. We have called these 2 our uncles for years. They are like family to us. They are gay, which is important to remember as you read this. My brother spread rumors that I was gay because he found it amusing to watch me be beaten by large groups of people. Every time I attempted to go outside, people would either beat me or throw rocks at me. My brother pulled this stunt everywhere we lived for the next 10 long years because of my father's actions, which necessitated frequent moves. Whenever I mentioned this to anyone, no one believed me. I was punished for lying. I won't hold what my brother did to me as a young child against him. However, considering he carried on with this behavior for over a decade, he ultimately did no better yet continued. From 2007 to 2009, we resided in a low-cost apartment, and all we had was a small television to watch. During those 3 years, my father frequently beat us mercilessly, and due to my father's drug dealings with our neighbors, my brother and I were sent to bed at 4 p.m. to keep us away from him during those interactions. Eventually, we moved to northern Wisconsin to stay with our gay uncles. They lived in a remote area with nothing to do. I believe we lived there for a year, but it is vague in my memory. Everyone else in that household received internet access, television time, and video games, while I was denied anything because I had accidentally broken a computer monitor, so I was forbidden from having leisure activities. I was a young child. We moved around so much that I lost track of the sequence of some events since I was very young at the time. Once, we lived in a car for a week, as my father frequently took his anger out on us and drank while driving. He once became violently angry in the car with us and drove recklessly at high speeds. I recall a fight breaking out on a school bus while we were in Wisconsin, which caused my brother to have a breakdown due to the abuse we suffered at home. He never broke down elsewhere for similar reasons, so I believe that altercation in the vehicle may have triggered him. We transferred from Wisconsin to Missouri to stay with a friend of my father's. He forced us to stay outside during the cold winter and didn't let us in, claiming we were inside too much and needed to play for an hour. However, we lacked gloves and couldn't even leave the yard. Additionally, it was a trailer, providing only a small yard. This man, not even a relative, would still threaten to beat us. Later, our mother moved us out and camped in a tent due to the abuse, compounded by the fact that the man was a felon. As I recall, we lived like that for about a week before moving in with another neighbor who was friends with my mother. While not an immaculate house, it was far better than our previous living conditions. Nevertheless, my father still abused me there. I remember being picked up by my hair and used as a punching bag by my father. This specific type of beating was not a singular event. I don't remember what led to that moment, but I likely just asked to play video games. During our time there, I became obsessed with the game Ninja Gaiden Black, and since the person we stayed with had numerous swords, I wanted to be a ninja in my youthful imagination. This was one of my earliest hyperfixations, and I would not learn I was autistic until I was 16. Not understanding this, and growing up in an abusive environment hindered my social development. Afterward, we moved to Missouri, and for the first time, we managed to put a down payment on a house. We walked several miles, only to discover that the house was entirely dilapidated, with all the walls torn down and the plumbing removed. I am unsure how much it cost, but we were scammed. I don't know if my parents attempted to address this issue, but given our poverty, the police certainly did not help us. Nevertheless, they provided us with temporary shelter. The following day, we moved into a deplorable apartment infested with flies. I was forced to sleep on a battered leather couch where I was scarcely fed nutritious meals because the owners never washed the dishes. There were 3 cats in the home, none of which were litter trained, so they relieved themselves in the bathtub. I was unable to bathe due to the heavy grime and filth. One day, while I was playing video games, the apartment owners expressed their disapproval of my activity. I sought to go to a friend's house to escape, but an adult who neither lived there nor was my parent grabbed me. I told him to stop making my life miserable, and he responded, "Just because we won't let you play video games doesn't mean your life is miserable." He then punished me by sending me to bed at 1 p.m. on that sofa while my father watched pornography on the television. It was indeed because of the video games. We remained there for a few weeks before we had the opportunity to move to a trailer park. While living in the trailer park, my brother received a clean bed in the living room while I had to sleep on one infested with bedbugs. I woke up each day covered in bites. I constantly itched until I bled from scratching myself excessively. There were days when I struggled to remember the last time I was not covered in bug bites, having endured this for who knows how long between the apartments and that trailer. One day, my father was asked to help clean the house and wash the dishes, which made him explode in rage. He didn't physically assault anyone but yelled loudly enough to be heard down the street. No one called the police, and he smashed all the dishes on the floor while threatening my mother. My brother and I called 911 and informed the operator that our father was breaking all of our mother's fine china. To us, that encapsulated what was wrong with his actions, as we didn't have an understanding of domestic abuse. We simply assumed it was normal. We were unsure whether to be concerned for our safety. I do not know what the police did, but no one was arrested. Eventually, we moved to a different trailer that was much cleaner and nicer, but that situation did not last long. One day, my father consumed what I can only assume was acid and devastated the entire house, destroying everything in it that wasn't a photograph of himself. In 2011, my father beat my mother, which led her to seek pain relievers. However, the pills she purchased could be used to produce methamphetamine, resulting in her arrest and a $100,000 warrant due to probable cause. Keep in mind that during the entire time we lived in that trailer park, my brother was spreading rumors to children in the neighborhood that I was gay for laughs, which meant while I was being beaten by my father, I was also facing violence from most of the neighborhood children. There was no moment of respite in the roughly 2 years we resided there. Subsequently, we moved in with our uncle on our father's side. He lived in a nice house with 2 bathrooms and 4 bedrooms. My aunt, uncle, and parents occupied 1 room, and there were 2 additional rooms that my brother could have had. Nevertheless, we were forced to sleep in the hallway. In their minds, everything that went wrong was my fault since I was the youngest, leading them to believe I could not think or do anything for myself without causing problems. I was required to clean the entire house every week. One day they acquired a dog and found a way to blame me if it defecated on the floor. To vent about some of their treatment of me, my uncle would frequently insult me, assigning blame for anything that occurred. If something broke, I was the usual scapegoat. They forced me to clean everything and closely monitored me for even the slightest cause for mistreatment. I received no gloves for the winter or new shoes. I had to wear shoes several sizes too small. My school noticed this and purchased me new shoes, which led to my uncle berating me for asking for handouts. I didn't even have my own bedroom, television, or any possessions. They were essentially a more abusive and extreme version of the parents from the children's show Horrid Henry. Surprisingly, their belittlement and maltreatment reached such egregious levels that even my father acknowledged the mistreatment, which in retrospect felt hypocritical since he had done far worse. After this, we were compelled to move in with who we presumed to be our half-sister, who was around 20 at the time. While living there, they had an untrained dog, which received more affection than we did. My brother and I were made to sleep on a blanket on the floor near dog urine. We lived there for 6 months before those people decided they no longer wished to care for us. They were meant to send us back to our mother, but informed the authorities that she was unfit to raise us, forcing us to go live with our grandparents. Once we moved, my brother and I lived with our grandparents in northern Michigan while our parents were absent. My father was incarcerated, and my mother resided with her sister, which was where we were supposed to be if not for our half-sister. My grandfather was extremely racist and commonly used the N-word in every sentence, and our grandmother was also abusive. We were forced to shovel snow reaching heights of about 5 feet for several hours in sub-zero temperatures to keep a wood furnace supplied with fuel because they refused to pay for proper heating. This work was referred to as chores. Truthfully, I could overlook this if the circumstances had been different. Since they were elderly, shoveling snow was reasonable for them, but we were 11 and 12 years old and the snow was stacked almost as tall as we were during the harsh winters. We lacked proper equipment or protection from the cold and were freezing. It amounted to nothing short of slave labor. After my father was released from jail, he resumed his abusive behavior. Once when I said, "Hey Dad," his response was to punch me in the face. At times, he would wake my brother and me with a beating, labeling it a just-in-case beating. This proved futile, as if we made a mistake later, he would beat us again regardless. When we reunited with our mother, we had to move back in with her friend in Kirksville. Her friend was a level 2 hoarder. His small trailer was filled with dozens of trench coats, double-breasted suits, and swords. He was very interested in film noir, and his residence was a breeding ground for roaches, some of which I ended up consuming. One day, my mother instructed me to tell my brother she was looking for him because he was out and had not returned home for a few hours. I was half asleep when she told me, and I said, "Okay." My brother eventually came home, and I forgot to communicate this to him. He then left. Later that day, he was arrested for throwing rocks at cars. Because of this, my mother had to pick him up, and the following day she received a call asking if she had a warrant. Consequently, she forced us to remain inside that roach-infested house for 6 long months. I was not allowed outside, and the windows were covered with trash, preventing me from seeing much daylight. Since I was supposed to inform him she wanted to see him, I was blamed for his arrest, and over a decade later, I still bear that blame. As a result, I was homeschooled throughout 7th grade, and my father convinced me that I was mentally limited, placing me in special education classes, which meant when I returned to public school for 8th grade, I was significantly unprepared. At some point between being confined indoors for 6 months and being homeschooled for 7th grade, we received internet access. I don't remember if the internet was obtained for educational purposes or during those 6 months, but it is irrelevant. Due to my abusive upbringing, a father who openly viewed inappropriate content in public, and suffering from stunted mental and social growth throughout my life, combined with a puberty spent locked away with unrestricted access to the internet, I developed a lifelong addiction to pornography that I still battle with. My brother declared to everyone that I was gay, leading to me being relentlessly and brutally beaten for half a year at the bus stop by high school students who were twice my size. They would kick me and throw me to the ground, beat me with pipes, and pull out clumps of my hair. I reported this to the school repeatedly, but they disregarded me, dismissing me as mentally challenged and consequently treating me like a non-entity. If I attempted to leave the bus stop, my brother would chase after me and assault me because he enjoyed witnessing my suffering. During school, I would misbehave and act foolishly. At first, everyone laughed with me and I believed people finally liked me. However, as you might expect, the child who constantly disrupted class soon became unpopular. I was removed from 8th grade and never had the chance to complete my education. I was deprived of any opportunity to attend high school due to truancy laws. One teacher, who was also mistreating me, threatened to involve the police. They expected a stubborn, autistic 14-year-old to behave like an adult. I understand I acted like a fool during my adolescent years. Who doesn't? But I was uninformed. The faculty, however, were aware and indifferent. Additionally, the faculty understood I had no means of returning home and that I could not arrange transportation, and it was pouring rain. It took me 6 hours to walk home in the cold, soaked to the bone. Upon arriving home, my mother chastised and belittled me for it. When we finally left that trailer and moved to a new location where we gradually acquired furniture, I was again homeschooled, having previously avoided police questioning about my absence from school. However, I was permitted to leave the house once school hours were over. One day, my brother returned home while my mother was out, and he asked why I was still wearing my shoes. I explained that I was waiting for him to come back to take the trash out. He did not believe me and accused me of trying to sneak out when I wasn't allowed to. He then proceeded to physically assault me and spit on me. He kicked me in the stomach, knocked me to the ground, and began to punch my face and head. When my mother came home, he informed her I was attempting to leave, and she proceeded to lie on top of me, punching my head repeatedly. I asserted that I had been waiting for my brother to return, indicating that school was over, and she still sided with him, telling me that I was not permitted outside since I still had schoolwork to complete. Years later, my brother rationalized his actions by claiming I was just having a bad day. While living in this new place, I had just turned 16 and finally experienced my first genuine clean bed, not one infested, battered, or covered in urine stains, but an actual proper bed. However, most of what I possessed that made me happy could be considered artificial joy. I had video games, the internet, and other distractions at this stage in my life, yet nobody loved me. My brother used me as a tool to enhance his ego, my father regarded me as a mistake responsible for his alcoholism, and my mother perceived me as a threat to her freedom. I have only experienced true happiness once in my life, during a brief encounter with my first and so far only real friend. I was 16 when I met her, she was about 21. We connected profoundly and I had more enjoyment with her in 1 hour than in any amusement park I had ever visited. Unfortunately, she moved away and I do not see her often, nor does she have time to converse online. When I turned 16, I came out as bisexual, believing it would put an end to my brother's lies about my sexuality, so I wouldn't be subjected to more beatings. It worked, he ceased his behavior, and I only needed to ensure that I did not disclose this to anyone else. However, I now question whether he stopped due to the absence of anyone nearby with whom we could associate for several consecutive days since we were no longer attending school, or simply because he lost interest. He had previously hurled slurs at me every time we encountered each other, but now he referred to me as half a faggot. As a result of my family's actions, my mental state has significantly deteriorated due to my Asperger's syndrome. I often do not recognize when I am making others uncomfortable. I have only ever had one true friend and have never experienced a loving relationship. My mother has always supported my brother's behavior. He would beat me uncontrollably and pin me down, and she permitted this to occur, asserting, "Brothers fight all the time," or "he is just roughhousing." She even defended his actions when he would mobilize groups of people to assault me, claiming, "He's just being a bully. Nobody is beating you, they're merely picking on you," despite me being visibly covered in bruises. She never engages in conversation with me without finding an excuse to yell at me, never giving me the benefit of the doubt or accepting my word. She believes I am such a failure that I can't even wash dishes correctly and feels the need to inspect them after I scrub them clean. She uses every possible reason to start arguments whenever we go out, leading to frequent disputes in public. She employs the threats of depression and suicide to manipulate me into obeying her wishes, constantly shifting the focus onto herself during every holiday. Additionally, she accuses me of clinging too much to the past whenever I explain to them how terrible they are. She once labeled me an autistic retarded reject, and on several occasions falsely accused me of starting fights with her, knowing my brother would physically assault me. When I attempt to vent, she often counters by asserting it was not as severe as I claim because I received gifts on birthdays and Christmas, and occasionally went to amusement parks, as if cheap toys and rare excursions to an amusement park could compensate for severe mental and physical abuse. Furthermore, those outings happened every few years when my father succeeded in avoiding squandered our spare funds on alcohol. Most of the gifts received were inexpensive items from a dollar store clearance aisle. Almost everything of value we had was given to us by others. Around the time I turned 18, I discovered a YouTuber named Captain Disillusion after seeing a video titled Gyro Drop Quick D in my YouTube recommendations, which ignited my interest in visual effects. This marked the first interest I would maintain in my life, soon reinforced by a YouTube series called VFX Artist React by Corridor Digital. Their videos inspired me to pursue filmmaking, and that is exactly what I began doing. At that time, I was naive and believed it would be as straightforward as they portrayed it, so I embarked on creating my own film. I reached out to a CGI artist, sacrificed my birthday, and compensated him roughly $200 for a character model. After 7 years, I contacted my father to check on his life. As anticipated, he made ignorant, vulgar comments directing the conversation towards sex and asking if I was involved sexually. Because of that, I chose to sever communication with him, and despite this, he still sent me a text when I turned 20, which was the most ignorant message I have ever received. Here is a transcript of what he wrote. "Hey kiddo, happy birthday, man, I haven't heard from you in a while, hope you are well. Give me a call every now and then. Stay positive, things will come your way. Don't, whatever you do, take the Fossai ouchie. No jab, it's killing people and mixed in nanobots to control if not kill you, just be aware it's bad, do research, love you, be safe." In hindsight, I should have asked him which brand of condoms broke on him so I could sue them for my existence, but instead, I blocked him. Following that, nothing transpired until a month after I turned 21. On December 31, 2022, I met someone who asked me out on a date. I should have declined because I didn't know her at all, but I thought she was attractive and allowed my desires to cloud my judgment. I overlooked every single warning sign. She inquired if I was okay with her using drugs, and I was so starved for acceptance that I agreed. She took me on outings, drove me outside of town. For the first time in over a decade, I finally escaped this dreary, dull town. We visited Jefferson, Missouri, and I was so entranced by how much better it was than my hometown that I thought I had finally been rewarded in life for the hardships I endured, although the red flags began to emerge more prominently. She tried to persuade me to use drugs, drove while high, asserting she drove better that way, pressured me to use heroin, invited me over under the premise of wanting to spend time with me, and then brought her friends over to smoke crack, portraying me as the villain for not participating. After all this, she professed her love for me and then ghosted me for 9 months, returning with another man's child. It later came to my attention that she had 5 children, all from different fathers, and no custody over any of them. Despite her abusive and self-destructive behavior, I hesitated to cut ties because I feared she might fabricate false allegations against me. During these couple of years, the only positive aspect of my life was my film project. Eventually, that became my only reason to keep living. Around this time, I encountered someone online whom I admired greatly. He was highly educated and composed, and I felt at ease and secure with him. He was one of the few people to whom I openly revealed my true self, and I viewed him as everything I aspired to be: refined, skilled in his craft, and seemingly kind and patient. He was a saint even if he didn't admit it, and he allowed me to confide in him daily. Somehow he discovered my biography online. I posted an earlier version years prior and never made a fuss about it. Although I do not know how he found it, as I wasn't aware it was on the internet. For the first time in my life, I was corresponding with someone who didn't treat me like a friend, merely informing me of what would make me feel better, or someone with an image to uphold and be professional. He maintained a stern yet truthful demeanor, providing valid criticism supported by life experiences, without demeaning or belittling me like many others had. He had no obligation to care, yet he seemed to genuinely do so and was willing to continue assisting me. It felt like conversing with a parent I never had. Presumably, he was in his early to mid-40s. I viewed this man as everything I could have become if not for my upbringing. I envied his lifestyle despite knowing little about him. He served as my ultimate inspiration, encouraging me to educate myself and learn about art. In June 2024, I acquired my first car for $4,000. During the short time I owned it, I drove around St. Louis, as it was the only fascinating place I could visit. I was able to explore wonderful art museums and libraries. Unfortunately, my car eventually broke down, and I have not been able to return since. During my first visit, I met a man at an LGBTQ bar who instantly recognized my Asperger's and engaged in conversation with me about our shared interests. I thought we had a connection. He invited me back to his place and we slept together. He promised me a date. However, when I returned a few weeks later, a 200-mile drive, I found that he had no interest and treated me as merely a one-night stand. Following that experience, I spent the next few days in St. Louis due to car trouble, where I resorted to using Grindr and sleeping with a random man for a place to stay. It was not my proudest moment, especially as I made a similar trip back to St. Louis a week later for another one-night stand. In August, I lost my job and decided to take a chance by flying to Atlanta, Georgia, where I finally realized my dream of becoming a filmmaker and working on that film. I spent 3 weeks in Atlanta due to shipping complications with a delayed movie prop, but once filming commenced, everything fell into place, compensating for 3 years of hard work. Although it was challenging, I am pleased to say I pursued my dream to completion and never gave up. The following months were unremarkable. On November 5, 2024, I contacted the individual I admired again to provide him with a life update, promising to be less overly enthusiastic toward him. Later, on November 19, 2024, I invited him to a delightful fandom server I discovered, but he expressed that he was not ready to rejoin. During my time back home, I learned that my mother only required $3,000 by spring to relocate. However, securing a job in my small town proved difficult. On November 20, 2024, I called my brother about the situation, informing him that I needed a place to stay for better job prospects. He dismissed my concerns, attempting to persuade me to remain, asserting that I simply wanted to abandon her to fend for herself as if he had not done the same. I inquired whether he expected me to endure her abuse, while he left for similar reasons. He claimed he was experiencing difficulties and felt resentful, as if I was not equally resentful of our circumstances. It became evident that he recognized my correctness, he just didn't care. Regardless, I discovered that she could obtain that $3,000 on her own. Due to my mother's abuse, I contemplated it would be better to become homeless. Throughout the year I held my job, my mother took approximately or nearly $15,000 from me to save for a house. To clarify this assertion, I acknowledge it may be slightly exaggerated, as I am not adept at math. She addresses me in a condescending tone, looks down on me as if I were a child, and constantly yells at me. Upon learning that she could secure the money independently, I realized I was finally in a position to leave her, although, as I mentioned, it would leave me homeless. On November 24, 2024, I sought the advice of the person I admired, stating that I was finally able to leave my abusive mother. He had traveled extensively and experienced life at its finest. I believed he might offer the best guidance since I had always found his lifestyle enchanting as a child, and I thought I might have the opportunity to pursue such a life for myself. I assumed he would be aware of some culturally rich and artistic places one could explore. That should have been the conclusion. However, as November progressed, I repeatedly pressed him for advice and reverted to behavior I had promised myself to avoid. I was in a moment of despair and felt the need for the comfort he had provided me. His messages became my refuge throughout the year I had known him. Although I found immense comfort in conversing with him, I worried I might have made him uncomfortable with my persistent messaging. This fear left me paranoid and anxious, believing that anything I sent him constituted harassment. That comfort shifted to anxiety, turning unhealthy, despite the fact that his kindness and guidance still comforted me deeply. I came to believe that he only allowed me to continue reaching out because he did not want to upset me. I was unfamiliar with the idea that someone might not mind being around me even after prolonged exposure. Consequently, he concluded that he was the issue and believed the temptation of communicating with him was stressing me out, leading him to block me. I merely wanted to understand whether or not I was a burden to him. If there is any silver lining to this situation, it is that his efforts were not in vain. I genuinely believe I am now more knowledgeable than when I first encountered him. For example, my writing and reading comprehension skills have greatly improved, and I wish I could have celebrated that progress. I wish I could have acknowledged my academic growth during that time, but I did not. Perhaps he would have respected me for that had I been content with such growth. Now, I will eternally remain unaware of his opinions regarding me, and it saddens me that I will never know whether the only positive role model I ever had holds me in contempt. It may seem trivial to be this disturbed over someone I met online, yet he was the sole positive role model I had ever known. What I have shared about him is merely a brief summary of what he provided me. I suppose it is my fault for becoming emotionally attached to a stranger. Because of my father's actions, I lost my innocence and my childhood. Due to my brother's actions, I lost my social development. And because of my mother, I lost my education and my teenage years. Even now, she continues to take away my life, and I cannot sustain this any longer, so I may have to leave, even if it results in having nowhere to go and no one to turn to. I would prefer to be homeless than remain with an abuser. Throughout my life, I have developed a habit of isolating myself 24/7, merely playing video games and avoiding attempts to forge friendships, believing my brother would try to manipulate or assault them. Consequently, I have spent a significant portion of my life indoors, squandering my existence, aware that video games were the only source of solace I ever had. I would become angry whenever I lost a game, subconsciously thinking I would lose everything if my brother outperformed me. In expressing my frustration over losing, my father would beat us for raising our voices, and as a child, I thought I could weaponize that response to gain power over my brother. It is needless to say that he resented me for this, resulting in a cycle of abuse that lasted for years, as he continually excluded me from his social groups and punished me whenever he found an excuse. I recently contacted my brother to discuss our mother's abuse, and he recalled a time when she whipped us with a belt for making her miss the bus. I did not remember that incident at all, and my brother justified her actions, stating we were terrible children. I pointed out that we had simply been children, which reflected our mindset. This left me with only my film project, which was still in visual effects development, as the last remnant of my life, leaving me devoid of family or friends. The one person who had provided me comfort likely despised me. I was unable to find solace in my hobbies, as the communities surrounding them had proven immensely toxic. Sadly, despite my efforts, I no longer wish to continue working on my film, as it has lingered in development limbo for years, and the individuals I initially created it for genuinely repulse me, making me reluctant to show my face again. Therefore, I would have to reshoot it completely, which feels insurmountable. I have lost everything and everyone I have ever cherished, and I have been unjustly victimized by those whose duty was to protect me. Between the depression, PTSD, and a life seized from me by greed, I no longer wish to remain here. Story 2. My girlfriend took a vacation, broke up with me, and flirted with another guy over heartfelt texts. So what if we did kiss? I still chose you in the end. Now I'm lost in trust issues, wondering if I'm just pretending to be okay. Can our love survive this? A little backstory to my relationship. I have been with this girl for 2 years now, and I love her with all my heart. However, for the past year, we have been fighting and arguing almost weekly. We have tried various solutions, including improving communication, attending therapy, attempting to be less angry about each other's actions, and much more. Nevertheless, I am struggling particularly hard with pretending that nothing happened one time last summer. What occurred was that we were under a lot of tension throughout the summer and fought frequently. Both of us had planned to go on vacation separately with our friends or friend groups, and once together, just the two of us. She was the first to go with only one female friend from her college, and everything seemed fine at first. Unfortunately, we ended up fighting and breaking up the day after she arrived while I was still at home. This is where the interesting part begins. During that one day when she was there and we were talking, she attended 2 parties or clubs, despite my telling her that I did not like her going to parties or clubs frequently. At home, she might have gone once every month or month and a half, and I never complained. I simply stated that to set boundaries. Yet she completely disregarded my feelings and even mentioned that she planned to go every day multiple times on the first day before we broke up. The breakup itself was over something trivial, as usual, so I will not delve into it since it does not significantly impact her actions or mine. During the breakup, everything felt normal, but I was nearing my breaking point and certainly did not expect to be the one to contact her first. After she returned home after 7 days and a few more days without contact, I messaged or called her to discuss the possibility of breaking up amicably instead of while she was in another country. We met up to talk, and one thing led to another. As always, I ended up wanting to fix our problems. However, this time she was hesitant and wanted us to remain broken up for another month or so to think about everything. I respected her decision and did not push it, but as we spent more time together, the spark gradually returned and we ended up reconciling. We talked about her vacation, during which she shared how many guys hit on her while she was there. She mentioned a few guys she turned down, but one guy she said she befriended was also from our country on vacation and stayed in the apartment directly beneath hers and her friends. Though she did not talk much about him, I began to have suspicions. The next time we hung out, we discussed the men who had expressed interest in her, and I respectfully asked if she would show me messages with this guy. It is worth noting that we had never gone through each other's phones or asked to see messages. As I made that request, she became nervous and my heart sank. She began to smile shyly, saying she did not want to, and when I pressed her on it, she kept insisting it was a bad idea and that I would get angry. Initially, the messages seemed normal and friendly, but quickly took a turn for the worse. When I ascended, there was a moment when she and her friend were at a club and a guy was flirting with them and making them uncomfortable. She called that guy over, stating she needed him there, not both of them. At that exact moment, my stomach began to twist. I was smiling, but my hands started shaking as I held her phone. She noticed my reaction and warned me not to go further, but I did anyway. They hung out every day, visited each other's apartments, but according to her, his friend group was also there each time, along with her friend. They went to clubs together, but only he, she, and her friend were present, not his entire group. The part that devastated me was that they began sending each other hearts after every third sentence, as well as good morning and good night texts. The only thing missing from those messages was an I love you, which summed up the nature of those texts. She had known him for just 3 days. I shed 1 or 2 tears and confronted her. We had been broken up for only 3 days when she began sending hearts and she was in another country. I expressed how hurt I was that in the last 30 arguments, I was always the one wanting to resolve things and did not want to give up. Over something trivial, she went and did this. I told her how betrayed I felt that she did not even attempt to fix things with me or contact me, yet she was already sending good morning and good night texts to another man. Even though we were broken up at that time, I felt incredibly cheated because we had previously ended our relationship in the same manner multiple times, but we both understood it was trivial and that we would reconcile. This time, however, she did this. She continued sending hearts and flirting with him, even making plans with him for when they returned home. The texts persisted until the morning I called her to talk, and her last message with him was after we had gotten back together, where she informed him that she had resumed our relationship and could no longer talk to him. If I recall correctly, she even expressed regret that she could no longer speak with him. I broke down and nearly started crying, realizing that someone I love so deeply who claimed to love me more than anything could do something like that. Strangely, she is not the type to cheat, she does not party excessively, does not associate with bad friends, excels in her studies, and is generally not promiscuous. Therefore, it was deeply unsettling to think about what she had done. She began to cry, insisting that nothing happened, that they did not even kiss and only hung out. She repeatedly stated that she planned to stop talking to him after a few days, intending to gradually diminish the conversation until it ceased entirely. However, that logic does not hold when she was also flirting with him and making plans to see him after returning home. She had every opportunity to avoid flirting or changing the subject, and instead she took every chance to engage in those behaviors. It would have made sense if she had turned down every advance he made, thus reducing the conversation, but instead she prolonged it and initiated contact on numerous occasions, asking about his day, what he was doing, and who was winning the match he had mentioned watching. Another point of concern was that other guys had hit on her in the past, and I had witnessed how she interacted with them, often coldly dismissing their advances and making subtle jokes about their flirting until they lost interest in her. She explained that she did this because she felt bad, anxious, and found comfort when they stopped wanting her. However, her behavior with this guy was entirely different. She was careful in how she spoke to him, flirted back, and did everything I described earlier. She even became angry once, saying, "So what if we did kiss? I still chose you in the end." She does not seem to understand that this is not the crux of the issue. I told her I wanted to believe her, but it was never going to be as easy or regain the same level of trust again. Given that we are currently experiencing a rough patch, I cannot shake the feeling that we have become distant and that things will never return to the same level or at least above okay. Yet here we are still trying to stay together. I realize this is a lengthy account, but I needed to share my thoughts. I would like to hear your opinions on this situation and whether you believe she is lying or telling the truth. Additionally, I apologize if my spelling is incorrect in some areas. It is not my first language.